there tended, until recently, well, overwhelmingly, there still tends to be a presupposition that findings like some of the ones I described are findings about the human discussed system. So if that's right, then, of course, you'd have to know what triggers discussed in various cultures, but you could assume that findings like that applied to theater goers 400 years ago and applied to people in China and what have you. Is that assumption true? Answer. Increasingly, we're finding out, and indeed, you're giving me a wonderful opening to talk about my favorite paper, a paper about to appear in Behavioral and Brain Sciences by Joe Henrich, Arnold Zion, and Steve Heine, called Weird People. WEIRD is an acronym. It stands for people in cultures that are Western, educated, industrialized, rich, and democratic. Okay? The take-home message of the Weird People paper is that weird people are weird. And this isn't an analytic truth. But the impact is just devastating. What they show is, first of all, just looking at the area of empirical psychology, survey of, I forget what the number is, but roughly 40 major journals for 40, roughly, years. Turns out 95% of the studies, 95% of the subjects, the participants in those studies, have been weird people. Okay? So what we mostly know about is the psychology of weird people. All right, fine, but of course, if you were studying liver function, you'd think, well, weird people's liver function is probably about the same as non-weird people's liver function. Second part of the paper reviews, again, I forget exactly how many, but roughly 15 or 20 major psychological variables. It turns out weird people are outliers on every last one of them. Weird people really are weird, and it gets worse, because most studies not only focus on weird people, they focus on university students. And university students are weird among the weird, that is to say, they're outliers amongst the outliers. And a very significant part of those studies use your captive subject pool, namely freshmen and sophomores at leading universities in the United States, Western Europe, and Israel. Okay? Well, it turns out they're weird amongst the weird amongst the weird. All right? So what's the point? The point is, at this point, we don't know enough about the extent of cultural diversity, even about things that people had thought, well, once we've discovered them, they're likely to be pan-cultural or universal. We don't know the answer to that. Do things like disgust, garbage, disgust-evoking, things that clearly evoke disgust in us. Everybody every last one of you in the room is weird, right? You're from a Western, industrialized, educated, rich, and democratic country. Do things that evoke disgust in us evoke disgust in Elizabethans? Answer, we don't know. Okay? Does the system work in the same way? Answer, we don't know. So I think it's one of the most exciting areas of research, but also very humbling in a way to realize that much of what psychological science in particular has been teaching us for the last 75 years may not be about human psychology at all. It may be about weird people's psychology.
Excellent. Next question. Let's go over to Kate.
Okay, this question also has to do with the psychology of response, I guess, and it is directed initially at Franco, because I'm troubled in one way by an analysis that is based on plays, when one takes into consideration the performance element to the dramatic. Because I'm thinking, what if you take a video of a play production and you then analyze those other forms of connection that take place. People who are indeed on stage at the same time, but don't say a word to each other, but in that production, they're staring at each other all the way through, or they exchange a meaningful glance or a glance of hostility. Character who might slap somebody else on the back, even though no word is exchanged. The creation of those kinds of networks, though, could be seen as interpretive networks rather than ones that are structural to the play in the first verbal instance. They're networks which are then imposed upon it as an act of interpretation by either director or by actor. Pause. When we're reading, we're going to impose structures of interpretation on what we read that are going to be influenced by, sure, verbal elements, parallels, which are created through metaverb or through rhythm that link one character to another in a way that isn't done overtly by the plot. But we're also going to create individualistic patterns of connection between character as we read, which I think links into that whole question of cognition. What can we learn from your study about the networks which may be formed within the reading interpretive mind, as opposed to the networks that exist within the text? Are they going to be overlapping networks, or might they be very different networks? And can you suggest any ways in which we might start mapping and layering such maps?
No, I can't suggest. I mean, network theory, I mean, for what little I know about network theory, is that one of the greatest surprises is that networks of banks and networks of neurons and networks of friends behave in such, and electricity grids behave in such similar ways. And there are reasons why that is so. So one can imagine that if cognition, if our understanding of a play we've never seen before proceeds by the construction of a mental map, there may be some similarity between that and what I'm showing here. But honestly, whereas I feel reasonably confident about these things, I don't about the others. So, as for these networks not being complete because there are other potential networks that could be constructed, here for me the key term is the fact that you use the conditional. Yes, they could be constructed, and by all means, let's do that and see what the relationship then is. And if they, for instance, this is something that I myself will do. I will probably not do what you suggested, but I will try to do something with novels. In novels, okay, you can chart, what characters say to each other, but then those characters appear dozens of times in a chapter by simply opening doors, thinking, etc., etc. How can that be charted? And what would the silent chart? And do you see what I mean? So in principle, it's